Well, welcome to another session. In today's session, I am going to talk about the idea of why men cheat or why we cheat. Now, before I start, perhaps I would like to um, perhaps explain that I cannot cover the entire conversation about cheating in one short session. So what I might do is break it down into a number of separate parts, just so that the content is easy to assimilate, so that it's not too much or too long. I will also say before I start the session on cheating that I can, in many ways, respect different people's perspective about cheating. I'd like to hope that at the end of what will be maybe 2 or 3, some could go up to 4 sessions, that perhaps you might learn something about cheating from a male perspective. I'm certain that most of what you already know about cheating could perhaps make room for different, perhaps very different and divergent perspectives. In any case, I hope you, as always, you find this useful. Now let me start by qualifying the concept of cheating by making a statement. In order to understand cheating, the act of cheating cannot be discussed without the concept of lying. Now there are 2 concepts that are usually embedded in, you might say, people who are unfaithful, or the act of unfaithfulness, and that has to do with lying and truth telling. In order to understand cheating properly, one of the things you have to do is connect the cheating with the intention or the intent. In many ways, it's I liken it to the concept of trying to identify if someone has been, either through their actions or through their words, if they're being discriminatory towards you. My perspective on such matters has always been that you have to separate the act from the intention. And in other words, in order for you to understand whether the act was intended, you have to understand the individual, which makes it very complicated. In any case, let me start by saying that cheating goes hand in hand with lying. And there are several forms of lying. There is deception. There is where you conceal information. I'll call this concealment. And there is where you're very good at spinning what should be the truth. Now, all of those, you can categorize all those 3 into the concept of lying. Now, or you can put lying as number 4. I like to put lying as number 4. Deception, concealment, and where you spin the information. And then number 4 is lying. Now, at the core of each of these, you can identify intent or intention to cause harm or to cause pain towards another. Because at the end of the day, the question should be, what was the intended outcome expected? Was the person trying to, or was he trying to cause harm or cause you pain? Now, with that said, let's come back to the whole concept of cheating. I would like to make a statement which I hope most women will understand. And that statement is that cheating is not the same for men as it is for women. Let me define the female perspective of cheating. And perhaps if I'm wrong, someone can correct me. From a female perspective, cheating applies when there has been an act of deception, when there has been intimacy shared, whether physical or emotional, shared with another person outside of the union or outside of what's meant to be a relationship. So it has to be expressed physically. And even if it's not expressed physically, it has to be emotional and mental. And for a woman, those two things will constitute the act of cheating. But what women tend to focus more specifically on, is the physical aspect of cheating. When there has been some form of intimacy or affection shown physically to another woman, women call that cheating. From a male perspective, it's very different. And I will perhaps define a male perspective so that women have a different contrast, something to hold onto. In today's session, I'll try not to go into detail on each of those aspects, but suffice it to say that from a male perspective, we see cheating very differently. We do not see cheating as sex or having sex with another woman. And I'm referring to technically speaking. Now, I'm not trying to get into the debate of the action itself. I'm saying technically speaking, in a man's mind, we see cheating very differently. To understand this, you have to go back to something I've shared in one of the prior sessions, where I define from a male perspective how we rank ourselves in value. In other words, what's a man's value? And at the core of this has to do with our ability to provide. So it has to do with resources and our ability to protect. Those two aspects is primarily how men are judged. Our ability to provide and our ability to protect. So from a male perspective, if you consider what I've said in many of the sessions, that ejaculation or sex to a man is synonymous with urination. Think about it in this aspect. If we need to use the loo or if we need to use the toilet, we have to use the toilet. We don't associate sex with something very emotional. For most men, sex is sex. At the moment, there might be feelings involved during the sexual activity, but once we're done, and I guess this is something that most women do not realize, and I've shared this with a number of female friends, and I don't think they believe me when I say this, but let me share the same, you might say, philosophy with you. When we have sex, and when sex is done, just like when we use the bathroom, if we need to, for whatever reason, release the discomfort that we have, we do not keep a memory of that experience. We have sex and we move on. So to a man, typically, there is almost no emotion associated with sex. And that's the reason why we can have sex randomly with multiple partners. And 6 months from when we had sex with the first partner, we can't really recall the experience. And we wish to have the experience again, to remember the experience. We also do not associate a deep level of emotion. For us, it's just sex. Ejaculation is like, in most men's perspective, urination is synonymous with urination. It doesn't matter where we ejaculate. In the same way, if we need to use the bathroom or if we need to use the toilet to ease a discomfort we have, some toilets are more preferable to others, some are less preferable to others. Most people would rather use the toilet in their home. Some people, if they are out and about and they really, really, really have to use the bathroom, they might close their nose, go into the dirty toilet, get the job done, and walk away. Once we've walked away, it's done. Now, the point I'm trying to make is this. A woman has to understand that sex to a man generally has no emotions attached to that experience. Even if the sex is great, we're not naturally emotional beings. We're rational thinking machines. We're cost benefit calculators. So if we meet someone and sex is great, in our mind, we want more because the benefit of the sex exceeds the cost. If we meet someone and the sex is great, but the cost exceeds the benefit, we don't want to have sex with that person. We move on to the next. So we're rational in how we calculate our moves and what we do. Now, I'm saying that to make a point that from a male perspective, cheating applies as follows. Number one, we meet someone and we are providing the same or similar level of resourcefulness or resources to that person as we are providing to you. That's number one. So from a female perspective, that's how you should think about it. Is he cheating? The second is we provide the same level of protection as we will provide or as we are providing to you. Now let me expand on those two items briefly. The first, in providing resources, I'm referring to providing money, providing some level of upgrading lifestyle, wining and dining the person, but making that almost consistent with what we're providing in what should be a relationship. So if we are caring for the person, for example, we're paying for their homes, we're paying for their rental accommodation, we're paying for their car, or if they have a loan on a car, we're paying for the loan, we're paying for their upkeep, we're paying for their clothes, we're paying for their makeup and lifestyle preferences. That is what a man would normally do for someone who he's exclusively in a relationship with. If he's providing that level of courtesy to another woman, whether that be more or on par or slightly less, that is cheating. Now, secondly, it has to do with provision of protection. Now, in today's day and age, we do not have to go to war. We do not have to fight. We do not have to provide physical protection to our loved ones like we used to, for example, during the hunter-gatherer period. Back in the day, a man had to protect his family, and he protected his family with his life. So we give our life as a token for your youth, your beauty, your intimacy. And that means that if we are given the same level of protection, whether that be physical protection or whether that be protection funded through resources. For example, I have met a woman who lives in a relatively rundown location. I paid to have her upgraded to a much better neighborhood where there is safety, perhaps a better apartment, where there is more safety, more security. In many ways, I'm providing protection through a third party. So if a man is spending resources to provide protection for a woman, that is not a woman he's dating. Or if he is providing physical protection, for example, the woman is in some form of discomfort, maybe based on a disagreement with someone that she lives with or someone she knows. If we are willing to stand in the gap between her and that adversary, and we're happy to do that at whatever cost, including our lives, for the purpose, very good point to make, for the purpose of exchanging that protection with her youth, her beauty, intimacy, and sex, that's cheating. Now, I made that clarification simply to make a point. If I'm walking down the street and I see a young woman who needs my physical protection, I will step in and I will sacrifice my life for her safety. Now, I don't have to be gaining something from her in return. That is just the duty of every man. We treat each woman we meet as our mothers or sisters. It doesn't have to be a lover. We stand in the gap. Now, I made that point so you can understand that the protection I'm referring to is an exchange for intimacy, for affection, for sex. We're cheating if we're providing resources or protection to the woman at a level above, on par, or below what we are providing to someone we are in an intimate relationship with. Now, keep that aside. And let me talk about two important points of cheating that women have to understand. There is selfish cheating, and selfish cheating applies in several scenarios. And there is something also called strategic cheating. Now, let me talk about those two very briefly, although I will not talk about them in today's session in detail. Selfish cheating is where we make decisions for our best interest. It's purely based on self-interest. It's based on what we want. In many ways, that type of cheating connects to the concept of lying and truth telling, where I made reference to deception, lying, or whether I'm trying to conceal information. And finally, the art of spinning. That is selfish cheating. In the same way, there is strategic cheating. So, for example, I meet a young girl, I find her very attractive, and I decide I'd like to, although I am in a committed relationship, I would like to have sexual affairs with her because I want to. In this case, maybe in my mind, I really have no intentions of being in a relationship with her. For me, this is purely lust, physical. I just want to have sex with her, just for maybe to satisfy a thirst I have. That's selfish. Now, strategic cheating is where a man is in a relationship. He has decided he wants a divorce, or he wants to walk away from that union, even if it's a civil partnership. Let's say he has a child with his partner. Let's also say that they've been to counseling and they've been to see a therapist. They've actively both tried to make it work, and they have not been successful. And he has decided that he intends to file for divorce because he's reached the end of the road. Now, that could also be because he believes something else is better on the other side. Strategic cheating could be if, for some reason, he meets someone before he files for divorce, or if he decides to test his affection or intimacy towards another woman for the purpose of trying to reconcile whether this issue is primarily more to do with him and not the relationship. In many ways, he wants to test and see whether the grass is greener on the other side, because sometimes we always feel that the grass is greener on the other side, which is often false. Strategically, he could make a decision independently, or he could make that decision even though he recognizes the challenges. He could make that decision by being truthful with his partner or with his wife and say, listen, I think I'm going to go outside and have a need met because that need is not being met in this relationship, but I'm not leaving you. I just like to know whether perhaps it's more to do with me not wanting to be in this relationship, or whether perhaps this is an issue with me and not the sex. So that's strategic. The decision is made because you've got to the end of the road, and in many ways it's a call for help. I don't support or subscribe to that behavior in any case, but I'm saying some people can get to the end of the road and they can have an affair. This is where people have affairs, or where people have one night stands, or where people actually have emotional, intimate affection for someone else that has not been consummated physically. That is strategic. But the intention is to see whether there's something still in you, perhaps whether you can love again, or whether you can feel for someone again, and perhaps whether you can salvage the relationship you have by going out, coming back and realizing, no, well, the grass is actually just green on the other side, and I'm happy being here. Now let's put all of that to one side, and let me just answer the question that women have been pondering on for a long time. And many of them have found the answers to the simple question, why do men cheat? Some are still looking for that answer. Some perhaps have refused to hear out why we do what we do. I'll give you some very simple reasons. I will not go into each of them today. I'll give you 5 or 6 specific reasons why we cheat. And in the subsequent session, I'll try to expand on the concept of cheating, because cheating has to be understood not as a blank slate across men of all demographics. I separate men that I speak to into 3 groups. The first is what I call preschool, people who are 18 years old and younger, 18 to 35. That is my target demographics, and 35 and above, who are actually mature men. Cheating will vary depending on where the man is in each of these groups. It's not the same. Firstly, you can't have cheating without a commitment. An agreement is not cheating, or the breach of an agreement is not necessarily cheating. The commitment in a relationship, and that has to be specifically a relationship. And I define a relationship very clearly. That's when we use the word cheating. In any case, let me talk about why we cheat. The first reason men cheat is because we want to. It's not rocket science. First reason, we want to. The second reason is because we can get away with it. Again, common sense, it makes sense. I'm sure you would agree. He wanted to cheat and he thought he could get away with it. Most women would agree with those 2 simple reasons. The third is it feels good. And this is where I guess I start to lose some of you women, because it's hard for you to reconcile the fact that a man says it felt good or it feels good. But leave that as it may. And the concept of it feels good, let me very quickly expand on that. It feels good doesn't mean that he has no conscience. It feels good means that the variety is something he enjoyed. It's similar to if you have money and you could afford to have exotic cars. You would want to drive different types of cars. Some days you might want to drive an Aston Martin. Some other days you might want to drive a Rolls Royce. Some other day you might want to drive perhaps a Tesla. That variety keeps the driving experience exciting. It's not rocket science. Number 4 is that it is in our nature. And this is where, in the subsequent sessions, I will try to go into some more detail, because most people do not understand that we are an extension of the animal kingdom. This isn't something that requires a high level of IQ. We're animals, and we are an extension of the animal kingdom, and simply we are doing what we do as animals. Number 5, and this is I guess this is where people start coming down hard on men for this action. Number 5 is because we can afford to. Cheating and monogamy, in the early days, the whole concept of being in a mono relationship applies to men who could not afford to have multiple wives or multiple partners. In many ways, forgive me for saying this, but mono relationships are usually for people who are poor, or people who are not wealthy financially, or for people who don't have game, or for people who have a strict code of conduct of what's expected in a relationship. But let's put the third group aside and simply look at those who can afford to. Most men will tell you that if they could afford to, they would. They don't do it because they cannot afford to. And number 6, and in my opinion, this is perhaps, of the 6 items I have described, number 6 is the main reason why we cheat. And the reason is simple: because you make us, or you push us to do it. A very painful concept for women to accept. We cheat because you push us. I won't say you force, I'll say you push us to do it. And I'll explain in a summary fashion why that happens. And maybe one of the ways to understand this will be to go back and listen to the video I did about why there is no benefit to a man to get married or to be in a committed relationship. But suffice it to say that one of the reasons, or one of the ways through which a woman pushes a man to cheat is sometimes as follows. Once the relationship begins as an exclusive relationship, I have to be careful how I say this so it doesn't come across as being judgmental. Let me phrase it in a different way. I think this would be the best way, rather than say something that might cause too much pain. If you want to minimize, I guess I'm using the principle of inversion, meaning I'm going to answer the question by inverting my answers. If you want men to refrain from cheating, and if you want to minimize the probability that that will happen, there are a few things a woman has to do. Number 1, she has to give him sex on demand. If a man has to beg for sex, unfortunately, he will find it elsewhere. It's really simple. Number 2, you have to stay as attractive as you can. As beautiful, as fit, as attractive as possible. And that simply means that we want you to stay as thin as possible. We want you to remain as active physically as possible. The more athletic you are, the better. We also want you to come as naturally as possible, if you can. So in principle, it has more to do with sex on demand, but connected to that sex is how you look. If you stay thin, you stay sexy, you remain youthful, you remain active in the gym, so that we find you desirable, that minimizes the likelihood that he would cheat. Number 2, if you give him peace, the likelihood of cheating minimizes. You've heard me talk about, in one of the prior sessions, I talked about the 3 S's: sex, serenity, and servanthood. It's really that simple. The more you nag, the more you belittle us, the more you make our home a place of war rather than a place of peace, rather than a place to nest, the higher the likelihood that we will cheat. Because we will find comfort in the wrong places. Really that simple. And then finally, I talk about servanthood. And most people perhaps do not like that word. In any case, if you cannot serve me or serve him, and by serving, I'm talking about serving with your attitude, the value systems you have, your behavior, your temperament. In many ways, the traditional values women once had, he will find it elsewhere. So we're usually looking for peace, serenity. We're looking for sex, which is sex on demand. We don't mind waiting during specific periods, but we don't want to have to beg for sex. Usually in a committed relationship, women have the monopoly in sex. You get married and he can't go elsewhere until you certainly, most women, decide to use their sex as a weapon to control the man. You will cheat. Very simple. So if you can give him sex on demand, if you can stay sexy, if you can stay thin, whether you've had a child or you haven't, doesn't really matter. If you can stay thin, if you can keep your natural hair and keep it as long as possible, if you can be less artificial, if you can give us peace in the home, and if you can actually, in many ways, come to the table as a servant, not as a servant who begs and cleans out mess up. No, I'm talking about servanthood from the perspective of your attitude and your behavior and your temperament and your mannerisms, and just being feminine. And if you can support that with the ability to be a traditional woman, in respect to, and I say this, you want to keep his belly full, you want to keep his balls empty, and you want to keep the environment peaceful. So item number 6 was because we cheat because you push us towards another woman. It's really that simple. In the next session, I'm going to try and expand and maybe go into some of these items in more detail, so that it's much easier to understand. Let me conclude today's session by saying, just be open to these ideas. Who knows? Maybe there's something you can learn from it.